Welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. I have another interview for you this week, and I love doing the interviews because I feel that every time I do one, we are adding to the pool of wisdom that only homeschoolers can truly give to other homeschoolers. And every interview is slightly different because every person is slightly different and everyone's homeschooling experiences are slightly different. And we've all got something that we can learn from each other. Today I'm talking with Amy from Louisiana in the US. Amongst the interesting things we talk about and the wisdom that she imparts to you include deschooling your children, how long to expect that, depending on how long they've been in school. Co-ops, the pros and cons, and how to keep control of them so they don't end up taking over your life. Child-led learning, and some of the inevitable politics that flows over into homeschooling and practical tips of how to deal with that too. There are other things that we talk about today, and I so hope you enjoy it. I know you're going to learn something from it, and I'm grateful to Amy for her time. Well, Amy, thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about your homeschooling experiences. I'm looking forward to hearing them myself.
They weren't very long, but I'm willing to talk.
Oh, look, the thing that I'm getting from so many people who listen and homeschoolers is that they're just hungry for people's experience to see who they resonate with and what advice and thing they can get. So, all right. Here we go. Amy, how would you describe your homeschooling curriculum and approach?
Okay. Well, I want to preface by saying I'm no longer homeschooling, but we did homeschool for 3 years. And I'm still pretty well versed in the homeschool community because I still run a Facebook group for our state homeschool support. So just, so that's rule number one. You don't have to homeschool forever. I was probably definitely more unit studies based. Like I was never a box curriculum, like do everything out the box. I don't follow directions that well to begin with. Like, no, I want to do it my way. And then B, I never could find one that fit everything, like particularly science. I had a really hard time with science because although I'm Christian, every science was either young earth theory and men were walking with dinosaurs or complete evolution. So I couldn't find anything in between. So I kind of just picked, and in fact, the boys had two different things. Like one boy did Saxon math and one boy did Life of Fred. They were two totally different learners. So I just made it, and made it up as I went along, basically. And I loved, my favorite one was 5 in a row. I don't know if y'all have that over there, but because I'm such a book English nerd, I loved it because I also taught preschool. I have a degree in early childhood, so everything was literature based and unit study based. So everything was a topic and we did everything based around that topic. So I kind of pulled that from my preschool years to do. And I had one who loved to read and one who hated to read. So they made it quite fun. But that was my favorite, probably overall curriculum was 5 in a row. And then I just pieced together science and math from other things. So my oldest son, 2 boys, oldest son, he hated to read and all that stuff. So he was a little more difficult, but he was 3rd grade through 5th grade. And at the same time, his younger brother was kindergarten through 2nd grade. So that's pretty close enough that I just kind of meshed it all together, and just certain things like math obviously expanded on the older one more, but we did a lot together and blended it all together, which, whole child unit studies, whatever you want to call it these days.
Yes.
So that's pretty much it.
5 in a row. I haven't heard that since our earlier homeschool days, but
I
from how
love
you've
that one.
described it, it all comes rushing back. But it's
Yeah.
also it fits the Charlotte Mason approach beautifully. Yeah.
And I didn't do, and you don't have to do everything in it. I mean, we didn't do every book because some of the books were pretty dry and outdated and didn't really fit their interests. But being a preschool teacher, I knew how to take a book and build a lesson on it. So I didn't really have to, I didn't really need the guide. It was more of a, what book should I use? But that was probably definitely my favorite one. And we loved Life of Fred for math. I don't know if people do that one a lot, but it's story based, and he made me he made me understand math, and that's pretty big.
Maybe I should go back and read it.
Because I stink at math.
It's not my strong point. But I like what you say about not having to adhere to everything, that just because there is a literature book in 5 in a row doesn't mean you have to do it. I mean, you run your homeschooling, right? So yeah. I think
and a lot of parents get bogged down on that. They think they have to do every single solitary thing. I'm like, no. I'm like, trust me, as a classroom teacher, I did not do everything I was planned to do. I promise you.
Yeah, once you learn the how to actually do that, you can take whatever book you want, a classic preferably.
Yeah.
Amy, what were the most important things to you and your husband over the years that you were homeschooling?
Basically, well, and I will say we kind of had to we found ourselves homeschooling not necessarily by choice at first, but because as a classroom teacher, I was like, oh no, my kids should go to school. I mean, I was a teacher, they should go to school. And my younger one had some special needs, so I didn't anticipate that I knew I could handle it, but I knew that he would do better being around other kids. And at the time, I believed homeschoolers don't socialize, they have to go to school to socialize. I believed all the myths that everybody believes. And it became obvious. The school my oldest was going to was getting dangerous. Like, it was physically dangerous for him to be at school, which is sad because it was elementary school.
It was a what school?
Elementary.
Oh, right.
So, I mean, you don't anticipate cops being called for a school bus fight on elementary age kids. So that started to percolate, and around the same time as when Common Core standards were coming in, which I have no clue how your guys' educational standards go, but it was something I vehemently opposed. And as a teacher, I knew it wasn't appropriate. I knew it wasn't developmentally appropriate, and I did not want my kid doing it. And kind of was just a culmination of the standards are getting worse and my child isn't safe. So I pulled him suddenly to homeschool, literally the day before state testing, which they were really mad about because they knew he would do well. And over here, the better the kids do in state testing, the more money the schools get. So they did not want him to not test. I said, oh, well, you should have kept him safe. So that was like at the end of the school year. So I found myself suddenly like, oh, okay, now what? But it worked out because thankfully I was able to take the time to de-school. And my husband has just always been he's a very good balance to my randomness. So he was just basically, if it works for you, go ahead, do it. He wasn't. And I had told him early on, I was like, look, you can have educated kids or you can have a clean house. Pick one. So we educated the kids.
So when you say you at the end of the school year, and you just mentioned so that they could be de-schooled, are you talking about giving them time to recover from experiences, or what do you mean by de-school there, Amy?
That's a term we use a lot in homeschool over here. I don't know about over there, but basically it's a time to basically decompress your child from the public school mentality.
Right.
The public schools here are there's no nice way to say it, they're very prison-like. There's not much free play. There's not, they're really not given time to talk and build their own personalities and explore their own interests. It's very rigid. So the rule of thumb in the homeschool world is for every year they're in public school, they need roughly a month to de-school. And it's basically detoxing for public school. It's basically getting that mentality out that You're not allowed to ask questions. You have to ask to go to the bathroom. You can't learn about that subject because that's not on the curriculum this week. It's getting that rigidness out. And time for the parents, because I found a lot of parents in our support group, they don't know their children. They really don't. They've sent them off to school. They see them at home for a couple hours at night. They're doing homework and sports and activities and clubs, and that relationship has suffered. And that deschooling time is a good time to do that. And for us, it was summer at the end of the school year. So we had a good time of continuing to just relax over summer. And it turned out I used to do, when we started back up, I kind of made summer our school time because it was so hot. We didn't want to go outside and do anything. So we would take a long break in the fall and the spring when the weather was nice for like a month.
Yes.
We didn't have to stick to a schedule.
Yeah, I mean, that's the privilege of homeschooling, isn't it? You do get to choose what suits you. So, but you took your children out reasonably early from what you just said. So using that, well, it's a ratio, I suppose. You said 1 month to every year they've been in a public school. So imagine how much longer it would take if you take your child out when they're a lot older into high school. That's going to take a long time. And even more so if your child went to preschool, we call it over here. Children over here generally start school when they're 5, but it's not, well, it's common. I won't call it normal. I'll call it common to be sending your child daycare, preschool. Okay.
Same.
Okay. So
like over here, every state has a different age that they have to go to school. And for years and years, ours was age 7. And at the time I pulled them, that was the age. So you didn't actually have to go to school till age 7, but they've recently changed it to age 5. But yeah, most children went to preschool of some kind. And the preschool, my 2 actually did go to preschool. One went to what we call early intervention preschool. So he only had like a few hours a day, and that was where he got the bulk of his therapy. So it wasn't a traditional 20 kids in a classroom public school like preschool. And then the other one went to the place I formerly taught at. So they both actually ended up going through there. So I would work. I had retired from teaching at that point, but they kept dragging me back in. Kept needing me to, this one's on leave. Could you do this? This one needs the medical leave. Could you go do this? So I never had to go back in the classroom, but I went back in the social support. I don't want to out the program. So it's a popular program. Everybody in America would know. Let's just put it that way. So I kept going back and working, and which was fine because I was there, they were there. I got to see them, throughout the day. I could go in and check on them and this and that. So, and it's not a long school day. It was only like 8 to 2, but yes, most American kids are at school really early from a very early age. So definitely.
So when you brought your children home, did you and your husband sit down and talk about what you were going to teach them, what was important to you, or did your husband more or less say, well, Amy, that's your training, you do, or were there things that he says, well, this is important?
He really didn't. He really gave me full control, but again, we have traditional roles in our marriage. I'm a traditional wife in that I generally handle their child rearing. I do work now, and I did work off and on when they were younger. But the bulk of their baby, toddler, preschool years, I was home. And obviously, once I started homeschooling, I was home. But we agree on we'll say the religious and moral topics that we teach our children. So that's just something we did together. But in the actual schooling part, he just trusted me to do what needed to be done, which at those ages, it doesn't take long to do homeschool. It's not 8 hours a day. It's, very flexible and a short period of time. So, and people don't realize there's lots of things that are school that aren't sitting down at a desk with a piece of paper in your hand, so there was a lot. We did all the usual library and park days, and I worked part-time sometimes at a gym. And so the kids went to PE classes there and, this and that. So he was very supportive of whatever I needed to be done. And he's he's a great cleaner. He still is. He just finished vacuuming.
He's a good man.
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess too, because I was a teacher. I mean, it was like you already did this, so just keep going.
It doesn't sound like to me, because of your own experience, that you had to try and figure things out as you were going, even though we've both agreed that homeschooling and schooling can be quite different. So as you look back over the several years you had there with your boys, is there anything you would change now? If you're going to start tomorrow, what would you change in that?
Well, I definitely did make it up as I went along. And it's kind of funny, probably the one of the major things I would change was probably one of my biggest accomplishments as a homeschooler. Because one of the things I found as I homeschooled was there were no co-ops or groups that really fit us, because they all required you to sign a statement of faith. And even though I'm a Christian, I refused to sign their statement of faith because it had things in it that I could not agree with. So I wasn't welcome in their groups. So I created, with several other friends of mine I had met, our own homeschool co-op. And it was both the best and worst time of our homeschool, because it was great for them to have that time and to have at one point we had 100 kids in the program. And It was all electives. It was just Harry Potters and sewing and knitting and sports and just fun stuff. It was all the fun stuff. But at one point we had 100 kids, and myself and the 4 or 5 other women who were running it, that was a lot of work. It was a lot of work and a lot of stress. And it ended up taking away time from our homeschool. And at the end, towards of our homeschool, I had decided that coming up year, I said, I'm done. I said, I can't do this anymore. This co-op is taking way too much effort, way too much time. It's taking away from homeschooling. And we built amazing friendships, and I'm still friends with the ladies. And, it was like both awesome that we accomplished that. And at the same time, that was a lot. Like looking back, I should have had more boundaries to say, okay, no, we're not going to get that big, or, hey, I need more help with this. But that was me not establishing boundaries. So.
Okay. Can you take that one step further then, please, Amy? Because I would imagine there's a lot of listeners who will be in the same kind of predicament. What advice would you give them if they are knee-deep in helping with co-ops but finding it overwhelming? What practical advice can you give for people on that journey?
Just speak up. And obviously much of it has to do with the people you work with. If you're building something like a co-op with other women, you should like and respect each other, and it should all, and that part be cohesive. And it was for us, it was fine. But we just got too big, and it became too micromanaging of, we actually had to have insurance and be a real business and all this kind of stuff, not just friends going together at a play group, So it became a whole actual business, which became, and if you've ever worked with other people's children's problems becomes your problem when you're the boss. So you have to, and it got to be too much like my old teaching days. So if anybody's in that situation, I would just say you need to speak up and make sure your tribe of women are all on the same page. And if it's too much, step down. That doesn't mean your kids have to leave the program, volunteer in other ways. If you don't want to be in charge anymore, what other way can you help? And I think if we'd have stayed longer, if we'd have kept going, because the co-op itself started to disband because original founding leaders started to move further away. So it was harder to coordinate things. And nobody else wanted to step up in leadership because they were like, wow, that's a lot of work. We're not doing that. But if you can get a group of people and you rotate these responsibilities, it would be much easier. And you don't have to be so big. You could just make a group of 20 and don't be official business, and y'all just make, field trips and, stuff like that. I have a tendency to go big or go home.
Okay. Thank you for that advice, because I think there will be some people looking to step back and have a little bit of a think about what to do next, hey? So that's one of the homeschool groups that you initiated. I know you've mentioned that you did do some. Let's stop and talk about some of the other groups that you initiated and what was relevant for then and what is still happening and how it could be applied to the modern. Because how many years since you've homeschooled, Amy?
We started in 2013 and we quit in 2016 because I got a job offer that I could not refuse.
Right.
And it allowed us to move out of the neighborhood where the unsafe school was. And so I ended up I was like, I can't turn this down. I mean, we talked about it as a family. My husband had asked me to get a job to make just enough money so that it would be a little less stress on him. And this job that paid 3 times as much fell in my lap. So I was like, okay, I guess God's trying to tell me that I need to do this for my husband's sanity. And by this point, they were in middle school and junior high. And, I felt like the biggest time that they needed me had passed, And I know not that you shouldn't homeschool middle school or junior high, but it was going to be getting close to that time where I was going to have to start, piecing out. I wasn't teaching algebra. That was not happening. So it was getting closer to the time of, well, y'all are gonna have to go take this class here because I can't handle this, and we all talked about it as a family and they were all like, okay, fine, we'll go back to club school, we don't care. Thanks, guys. You could have been a little upset. Just a little bit. Yeah, one of the main groups I started was a Facebook group, which actually came from a national group at the time of people who were pulling their kids for Common Core. Like now how people are pulling their kids in America for other issues. That back then it was a opposition to Common Core. And it was a big, big national group. And I'm always the loudmouth that gets involved in stuff because I just can't. I can't not. It's just me.
It's just you.
It's just so and then people were like, well, we need somebody in Louisiana. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then, I mean, goodness, back then Facebook was quite a bit different in 2013 than it is now. But we just started small with a group, and it was, the intention of the group was the same as with the co-op, is that because it seemed like every support group was either super, super Christian or super, super secular. And I was like, why is there an in-between? Why is there not just a group that says, hey, I don't really care what you personally believe. Here's how to help you homeschool. Like, why is that so hard to find? So that's what we created. And it is still in existence to this day. I still have basically the same admins who have gone and they've homeschooled their own kids, homeschooled their grandkids, stopped homeschooling, had to come back and homeschool grandkids. There's a lot of years of experience in the admin group. And we just found it, we just felt like it was important for families to get the basic information without trying to sell them a group or a curriculum or any kind of thing like that, because every other support group was tied to some kind of co-op or entity that they wanted you to join and pay money for. Mm-hmm. So we just created the simple group, and at the moment, I think we're over 17,000 members still to this day. And we have the most common things is that people come in and they have no clue what to do. And in every state, it's very, very different legally on homeschooling. So we have a PowerPoint presentation that tells you what you need to do. Here's your options. Here's the links. Here's where you need to go. And over the years, we've built relationships with legislators and have made sure that it kind of morphed into an advocacy thing, not because we wanted it to, but because we were forced to. Because legislators are always going to try to take away your freedom and your rights, it seems. So we morphed. We still have support, and then we also have another side group that's an advocacy more group, and that's where people can really focus on, okay, here's the legislation that's coming, it might affect you, here's what we need you to do. So over the years, we have made call to actions, and we've stopped some really bad legislation where they would start to take some of your rights to your curriculum choices and try to insert themselves, because the current thing, again, which has been for the last 10 years, is that they want to give you money if they do charters and vouchers and all this kind of gobbledygook words. It all is code for money, and that with money comes strings, and then they can control your schooling. So we oppose that because we have a lot of freedoms in Louisiana for homeschooling. There's virtually, I'm not going to say no oversight, but very, very free. Very, very, nobody needs to know what you're doing. Nobody cares what you're doing. You just need to homeschool. So we have fought lots of legislation like that. We tried to fight the law that I said referenced where it used to be 7 years old and now it's 5. We tried to fight that law because it was not really necessary and it was going to force homeschoolers to notify the state that they're homeschooling earlier. We were unable to fight that one. But so over the years, we have just helped parents and fought bad legislation and supported good legislation. And none of us are really political, any of the admins. It just kind of happens. It's just
not?
like, I mean, because if nobody is paying attention, they're going to pass all kinds of laws that you don't know about. So we figure, hey, here's the information. If you don't like this, you might want to start calling your representatives. So time left, 9 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay.
You could always stop and start and do another one if you need to.
Yeah, that's true. We could. I might have to. Let's see how we go. All right. So how does an interested mum find these groups? I guess Facebook. Okay, you go to Facebook. What's it called, Amy?
Well, ours is called Louisiana Homeschool Support. So it's just for people in Louisiana. There are, I mean, if you just look in your local area and type your city and homeschool, you'll find all kinds of groups. Obviously, the more social media platforms that come out, there may be more, but I'm not a Snapchat TikToker kind of person. So Facebook does seem to be where most people still meet up, just because I think the way the platform is that you can communicate like that. It's a group, but if you just search your local area and homeschool or homeschool support or your state or something like that, there are organizations in America like the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and they have state groups and situations. I am not personally particularly a fan of them because I feel like they make it seem like they're a little more necessary than they are. And they've had some issues over the years where they tell parents it's super difficult to do this. And I'm like, but it's not. The law says this right here. So I think you're just trying to get people to join your group and pay the money.
Okay.
But yeah, if you just search your area, you'll definitely find stuff.
Okay, thank you. Do you have, Amy, any practical tips to make the homeschool life smoother?
Yes. Stop freaking out. You're not going to ruin your child in a day. If you're not going to, the biggest thing is people are like, well, I don't think I'm equipped to educate my child. They need to go back to public school. And my response is, why would you put them back into the institution that you don't feel like prepared you well enough to teach 3rd grade? Like, think about that. Like, you're saying, I can't do this, but you were in that thing. You were educated in that system and you don't think you can handle this, but you're going to go put your kid in it. I mean, you can do it. You can learn along with your kid. There's all kinds of stuff I learned. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. And I learned it with them. I mean, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to teach everything. You don't have to love everything that you teach. And you don't have to teach nearly as much as you think you need to. There's a whole lot that can be learned from books and outside and art and music. And you know what? Leaving your kid alone. I mean, a lot of people do unschooling. Y'all have that phrase there. And I like that to a point, that I do think as an adult and a parent, you need to be paying attention and you need to monitor. But child-led learning is wonderful. And there's no reason you can't teach a little math, teach a little English and a little science, but at the same time, let your child, what do they want to learn this week? Okay, they want to learn about butterflies. Cool, let's learn about butterflies. I mean, it doesn't have to be a script that you follow. And a lot of people find one of the biggest things we see in the support group is, I can't get my child to listen. And when I tell people that, I'm like, well, then that's a bigger issue than school. That's a bigger issue than the curriculum you're using. That's a relationship issue that you two need to work out. And along the way, you can do the school, but let's get that relationship fixed first. And then we can figure out, curriculum and what might work for your child. And you don't have to keep using it. If the curriculum doesn't work, don't keep using it. find something else. Take time. And learn your kid's learning style. That's one of the big ones, is people don't, like, I had two very different kids. One was very much outside active, needed to do things. I had another one that was just happy reading his little book and drawing. That's just, they're very two different people. Not every kid's the same.
That's got to be one of the biggest downfalls of just simply buying a box curriculum. It's
right. And to just breathe. People just, they freak out and they don't know what they're doing. And I try to remind them, I'm like, look, you had your baby and they handed him to you in the hospital. They didn't give you an instruction book, did you? Nope, you figured it out. You learned what would work and what wouldn't work. And you asked other moms, and you asked moms who already been through this phase, and you figured it out. You'll do the same thing with homeschooling. There's not going to be a homeschool police that's going to come knock on your door and say you're doing it wrong. At least for now, there's not.
Yeah. There are a few really good tips, because I think when you don't delegate the education of your children, you're a lot harder on yourself, unnecessarily so, which I think is also, Amy, a result of what we've been passively fed over the years, is that you can't educate your child. You need the experts to do it.
Right.
And believe that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gotten to the point where I think that if the experts told you couldn't teach your kid to walk, you wouldn't think you could teach your kid to walk. I mean, it's getting to that point that we have zero confidence in our ability as parents and as adults and humans to because even if you don't like the subject, you don't want to teach it, then don't teach it. Pay someone else to teach that subject you hate. That's okay. That's fine. You know, you don't have to do it all. You just need to care about your child's education and care about their future, and quite honestly, involve them in it, particularly as the older they get, because there's no reason your child can't have an opinion about what you're learning or his plan, or have some, advice in it. Like, that's one thing I can't stand about our public schools now, is the high schools. By high school, they have to pick their path by age 13, and they're pinned into these classes, and they have no flexibility and no chance to figure out who they are as a human. Well, in homeschooling, you can do all that. You don't have to pin them down. You can follow their interests and their desires and see where it goes.
I would think that most teens don't even know by the age of 16 what they want to.
No, they don't. Mine's 17. Mine's 17. He has no clue.
I would still consider that normal. I mean, that's the beauty of taking a gap year. Just go out and figure out what you don't want to do.
Yep. And you could do that as a homeschooler in Louisiana, at least anyway. As a public schooler, you cannot, because we have special funding for college, and you have to go straight to college after you graduate to get that funding. So it's a racket.
Sounds like a sausage making machine. Amy, is there anything that we haven't talked about so far that you would like to bring up?
Yes, definitely. I can definitely say everyone can homeschool, but I say that with a caveat that it's naive of us to not admit that there are circumstances that make it far more difficult to homeschool than others. And I don't use this word often, but there is a privilege to being able to homeschool, and it does take work on everybody's parts. So I think it's a lot of times I see, particularly older homeschoolers, well, you can do it, just make it work. Yes, but life is a lot different than it was 25 years ago when maybe you were homeschooling this person. I find a lot of, it's the way older homeschoolers. And if you're a 2-income family and you have no idea how to drop down to a 1-income family, or which you can make it work. It's going to take sacrifices, or you're a single mom. That's a lot to, expect of a woman, and not that she can't, but it's easy for us to just throw that statement out there that everyone can homeschool, and you can, and we can help you figure out how, but we have to do so in a way that recognizes that maybe it's not as easy for every single person to do so. And I've noticed our society has changed, that we don't have the community that we used to. We don't have grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles so close, and the family unit that it seems we used to have that would have made that much easier for the single mom or the widowed mom or the mom with a child with severe special needs. We need to give a little grace to those families if because I see a lot of homeschoolers be like, well, if you wanted to, you can make it work. Easy for you to say, but if you're not the one paying the bills and taking care of the child or driving an hour and a half to work because it's the only job you can find, it's kind of not very loving to make those assumptions. So I do want to say that you can homeschool and you can make it work, but it is going to take some effort, and it's going to probably take some creativity and figuring out. But once you get past the idea of what you think it has to look like, you probably can make it work easier than you think. It just might be a little different terms. I mean, obviously, if you have a 6-year-old and you work full time and you absolutely cannot give up your job, well, you can't leave your 6-year-old home alone. Obviously, you have to figure that out. So maybe there's a grandparent that can keep them during the day, and then they can do a little bit of the work and you can do more of it at night or on the weekends. And when they're 6, they don't have to do that much schoolwork. It's not a lot, you know? And if they're a teenager and you can trust them to stay home, or maybe there's an online hybrid school that you can do. There's lots of options. It's a matter of figuring out what might work for you. And I do find sometimes the homeschool community can get a little cliquey and judgy. Particularly in America, we have online public schools, which are not technically legally homeschooling. At least in my state, they're not. But to me and my group, we have always said you are more than welcome, because your child is home and they're not in public school. So yes, they may be doing the same curriculum on the computer that they're doing in public school, but you are at home with your child and you can supplement in all kinds of ways, and you're still welcome, and let's help you figure it out. And most people who do that, they only do that for like a year or so, and then they do traditional homeschooling because they're like, this stinks. They're like, this is just public school curriculum on a computer. I don't want to do this. So I call those the gateway ones.
Yeah. Transitioning.
The gateway drug to homeschooling. But I do think that most people can homeschool, and I think it's okay for adults and parents to say, I don't want to. I think that's okay. I don't think we should judge parents who absolutely just know for their mental health that it's not right for them to homeschool. But I think those parents are few and far between. And I think there's probably other ways that we could help those parents. And maybe there's a co-op that their friend goes to, and that kid can tag along, and then mom doesn't have to do the bulk of it. And, you know, I think we need to be a little more forgiving of families' choices, and life isn't black and white and doesn't fit in a box. So maybe we need to be a little bit, you know, more open to different ways of doing things.
What a good idea, Amy. Oh, yeah.
What works for you might not work for another. So let's, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say you can
Pardon,
homeschool.
say that again.
As I say, you can homeschool. We can help you figure it out.
Yeah, that's right.
I am curious, if you don't mind telling me how homeschooling is over there.
Sure. In New Zealand, you have to apply for a homeschooling exemption, because it's a legal requirement that your child attends school from the age of 6. But most Kiwis don't realise that that's it, and children start at the age of 5. Although it's more and more common now for children to be going to preschool, mainly because I think people have been fed what I think is an untruth of that your child needs that before they go to school. So if you want to homeschool your child, you must apply for an exemption. And all you have to do for that, the legal requirement is you've got to demonstrate to the Ministry of Education that you can educate your child as well as and as regularly as a state registered school. That's it. So tongue in cheek,
that's essentially what we're saying too.
Yeah, but if that tongue in cheek, a few years back, I heard a consultant say, if that's all you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Yeah. So inside that exemption, you have to be able to demonstrate things like give an example as to how you're going to teach a lesson and how you're going to evaluate it. They ask you to demonstrate the typical concern of socialization, and a few other things too. So it's quite an epistle that you do end up writing, and people have accused homeschooling here in New Zealand, oh, well, you're just taking the easy way out. If you've got to go through the whole schmozzle of that exemption, no, it's not.
No.
Yeah, so that being said, a few years back, they stopped sending in review teams. Within our schools here, you have the Education Review Office coming into schools to assess them. And wow, I've been in the school where it would just panic mode would happen amongst the teachers because of the standard. I mean, really, the ERO should be able to come into a school at any time by surprise and assess your school to see what you're really doing. Mm-hmm. So homeschoolers were subject to getting a review. Yeah. Well, in the 20 years that we homeschooled, we had 2 reviews, and they both went really well. And then the ERO decided that they weren't going to do them anymore because it wasn't a good use of the taxpayers' money, because very few homes, when they were being assessed, were found to not be educating their children sufficiently. So that's kind of an overview of how we are in New Zealand. Once you've got your exemption, you're in.
What's that?
Once you've got your exemption, you're in. You don't have to submit. Once you have your homeschool exemption, you are legally allowed to then homeschool your child, potentially right through their legal homeschooling age. And you don't have to supply a report, as they do in some states, and even in some states of Australia must supply an annual report. We don't need to do that. So that's how it works.
We're a little bit more free than that, I guess you would say, in Louisiana, because we have 2 options. And one is what they call non-public, not seeking state approval, which most families do until they get to high school. And then by high school, there's another option called home study. And the main difference being the home study is a diploma recognized by everywhere. No college can turn you down, military can't turn you down, any of that stuff. The other one, they're both parent issued diplomas, but the other one, technically they could turn you down for colleges or military or what. Never really heard of that happening a whole lot, but and then in Louisiana we have the scholarship program I talked about, that basically if you get good enough grades, you get a free ride to a Louisiana school. So for homeschoolers, they have to get 1 point more than the ACT that's required, and be in the home study program. And all the home study, the only difference is the way you notify the state. So the non-public, they don't even know your child's name. They just know your address, the name you gave the school, and how many students you have. And then the home study one, they have more of the identifiable information. And then, but most people don't do that till high school, because to get the scholarship program, you have to do that and get the higher score. So but you only have to do it the last 2 years of high school. So why go through any paperwork if you don't have to? But all they have to do then is when they do it and they renew for the next year, they just show like a list of books they read. Here's the name of the curriculum we use, or here's a standardized test. There's like a couple different ways to prove you did what you needed to do. And the same law applies, that you're teaching them the same required number of days, which obviously is way more because you're with your kid 365, and then that you're teaching them equivalent to, or the standards, which, like you said, it's not hard to do. The standards are pretty poor. So if that's your barometer, maybe we can aim a little higher.
It's not hard.
I mean, for Louisiana does not have an education system they should be bragging about. So it's not a very high bar.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was about to say, Louisiana's motto is "Thank goodness for Mississippi."
What does that mean?
Because Mississippi's usually underneath us in the scoring.
Oh, I see. So you're not talking about the river, you're talking about an area.
State, yeah. No offense, Mississippi. Sorry. It's true, and you know it. We're always decking it out for last place.
There's always somebody better or worse off than you, eh? So they can find it. I have sort of something that you might be able to give advice to. So you have the experience of taking your children out of school, and then you had your family reasons for them going back into school, but you've also said that you were aware of how the public school operated. So for parents in your situation who have chosen for whatever reason to be either a short-term homeschooler or temporary, what advice would you give them to be able to mitigate or be aware and deal with the things that you know are coming through the public school system, please?
I think a lot of it depends on, it's so variable because it depends on how old your child is if they're going back. But I do find we get a lot of questions in the support group of, okay, we're going back now, which our first question is, did you really give it a chance, or are you just frustrated? And sometimes we can help them work through it and they decide to give it a little bit longer, and other times they don't. And I also see a lot of parents, well, my kid says he wants to do X, Y, Z. And at some point I'm like, well, depending on their age, you're in charge of that. So it does come to a point where it's your decision whether they go back or not theirs. But I do think when they get to a certain age, by all means, they should have an opinion, and an input into the future, because like some students, in our state's case, if you want to play sports, you cannot be a homeschooler. There's technically a law that if the principal says yes, you can do it, but very, very, very few areas let you do that. So if you have a teen who is an athlete and they are kind of banking on a sports scholarship to get to college, well, then obviously they're going to go back to public school. But basically I tell parents, and unfortunately in Louisiana, the public schools have zero understanding of homeschool law or how it works, like none. It's one of our biggest battles is to get them to understand how to let the kids be withdrawn and how to put them back. Like they have no understanding. I don't know what happens to the Department of Education in these meetings, but nobody's telling the school what to do. So basically we tell people, look, and because and I think this is kind of across the board for states, that once you want to put your kids back in public school, there's some kind of placement test depending on your state. So if your state has a much more rigorous oversight process, well, it might be a little easier to go back to school because they know what grade they're supposed to be in and they've been looking at their tests all these years. In Louisiana, they don't. So like I pulled mine, and the oldest was 6th grade when he went back. So from 3rd grade to 6th grade, I mean, I really didn't have much record keeping because you don't have to in Louisiana. And they just said, well, here's your placement test. As it turned out, he could have gone back in 6th grade, but I actually made the decision to pull him and put him in 5th grade, even though age-wise and test-wise he was fine, because he would have been a young graduate. So he would have been like 17 starting college. And I was like, maybe I'll take this opportunity to redshirt you for a year. just in case. Teenage boys sometimes need a little extra time. But in most times it's just a matter of, let's take a placement test and see where they belong. There are some special education aspects to it that are different. But most people if they're putting their kids back in public school, they usually were already in public school at one point. It's pretty rare to have a homeschooler who did it all the way from, say kindergarten and say for high school they wanted to go. It does happen, but it's not nearly as frequent as people like me who kind of did both. So somebody that homeschooled that entire time and then wants to put them in public school, that would be quite a transition, I would think. So, but usually by that point they're in high school, and the kid really wants to play on whatever team or really wants to do whatever STEM program or whatever, something that's not offered in homeschool, which is a shame that it's not. But that's the way it is. So I don't hear a lot of parents tell me that they have a really hard time with them going back. I do get parents from time to time that tell me, okay, they went back and it was terrible and now I'm going to homeschool them again. And then those kind of families I tend to find have a lot of other things going on. And I'm like, maybe we need, maybe y'all need to sit down as a family and figure out what it is your family goal is and how are we, going to get what's going to be the best situation for this kid, because going back and forth is probably not great. for their mental health, because it's very different, so. But I mean, overall, it's not difficult, at least in my state.
What about your concerns about what the school are teaching your children?
That's a thing I could get ranty on that one. I kind of fall into a couple of camps of, number one, why didn't you already know what they were teaching? But that's judgy of me, and I shouldn't say that. But number two, okay, now you know. And then again, how old is your kid? How good is your relationship with your kid? How much of what you believe have you talked to your child about, and that y'all already all understand as a family? And are you all going to be okay that as they go through school, there's probably going to be things they teach your kid that you're not going to like? And will your child come tell you that so that y'all could talk about it? Are you willing to get involved and find out what curriculum they're using and what books they're reading? I think that has a whole lot to do with personality and how willing you are to be involved. Like in my case, I figured I'd set up a pretty good foundation. They know very well what we believe, and but teenagers are going to push back and teenagers are going to learn. So I will say my own we've had a lot of good, interesting conversations as he's heard things they say, and then we talk about it, but he's learning how to talk about it instead of just spit out what they say. He'll come home and spit out what they say, and then we talk about it, and he's like, oh, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. So if your kids are going to be in public school, and you know what, even if your kids are homeschooled, you should really know what's going on in public school, because guess what? Those kids are your community. So you might want to find out what's going on. And your tax dollars are paying for it. So you might want to go find out what's going on. But definitely, by all means, you just have to get involved, and you kind of got to become a loudmouth like me. That's how I ended up on national television fighting against Common Core. But
Television.
I did.
More than what
I was
I'd
on
want.
PBS and I was on Al Jazeera America. You don't have to get on TV, okay? You can just get involved.
All right.
But you should go to your school board meetings, and you should know what they're teaching, and you should have a communication with your teachers. And because it is different now, because not a lot of books come home. Most everything is on a Chromebook, a laptop, or something like that. Everything's online. But guess what? You can open up that Chromebook and stand over your kid's shoulder and see what they're doing. I mean, it's up to you how much you find out. And if you don't like it, and you don't like what they're teaching, and you have to put them in public school, then go to the school board meetings and fight for the curriculum to get changed, and pay attention to because curriculum does get voted on. I mean, at least here, it gets voted on. And when they change textbooks, they have to post the textbooks, and people can go read them, and they can go put their opinions on them, and then they can go to the meetings. But you have to be involved and be aware, and you have to know what your local school board is doing. So that takes some effort on your part.
True. Yeah.
Or you follow people like me in our groups, and we're like, hey, this is what's happening. You might want to pay attention.
Something similar happened during the lockdown period here in New Zealand. And so all parents found themselves homeschooling by definition. They had no choice. But many started to become aware, possibly for the first time, what their children weren't learning, and perhaps of equal or more concern, what they were learning. And there were examples being told of children learning online who were being told not to show their work to their parents. But that was one of the reasons being given as to why homeschooling applications in New Zealand rose exponentially over the COVID period. And I would be interested to find out what the trend is now. Has it tapered off? Have kids gone back to school? What's actually happening with trends? So that was an unintended consequence, really, is that parents suddenly were aware.
Yes, definitely. It's definitely went up in America. I know in Louisiana, one of the things my group does is we track the enrollments of homeschool numbers, and one of my admins makes a handy dandy chart with a little bar graph, and it shows how much it's grown. And it has grown exponentially just, in the 10 years, of course, but obviously since COVID, it did go way up. Now it'll take time to see if it stays going up, or if those kids who homeschooled if they're going to go back to public school. So we don't really know the full data of that just yet, because let's see, this school year was the first real, regular, normal, no anything different school year. Because last year you still had some kids doing online, you still had masks, you still had this. So for our state, this year is the first regular year back.
Wow. Yeah.
That nothing's canceled, nothing's changed, nobody has to wear masks, nobody has to show any proof of anything. Everything is fairly back to normal. So I am curious to see if because the trend has never gone down. The homeschooling has always risen here in Louisiana, always, for the last 10, 15 years. So I'm curious if that big jump during COVID, if it maintains, the amount, same percentage, which we won't know for a couple of years. So,
okay. Amy, is there any other wisdom you would like to impart?
I am wisdomous.
No, you're not. We've got some.
That's a French reference. Yeah, just calm down. Just really calm down. It's not that big a deal. But one thing I learned early on, because I trust me, I stressed a lot. I freaked out. I cried. There were bad days. There were bad days. But other mamas told me, they're like, look, if it's not going to matter in 15 years, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Is it really going to matter in 15 years? If it's not, then stop freaking out about it. You don't need to freak out about it. And again, if your kid doesn't learn how to diagram sentences, okay, we're in 2023. They can Google it. I mean, you don't have to know everything. By the way, I still don't know how to diagram sentences. And I love English and writing, and I still don't know how to diagram sentences. And I had English honors. I still don't know. But just don't be afraid to just take your time, figure it out, learn who your kid is, learn to like your kid, and learn to who you are as human beings, not just parent and child. Because your kid is he's his own entity. He's got his own things he believes, and it might not be exactly what you believe, but it's okay. You can learn to respect each other as human beings. I mean, you're still the parent, just don't let them run their house, but
yeah.
Yeah. But don't sweat it so much. It'll be okay.
Yeah. Okay. That it's kind of starting to pardon? It sounded very much like one of the last questions I ask homeschool mums is, if you could go back and visit your young self just as she was starting to homeschool, what advice would you give her? It sounds to me like you've dallied into that anyway. Do you want to specifically address that, just carry that theme on just a little?
I would have pretty much just told myself what I just said, because I sure was not calm in the beginning. I did all the things of buying all the books and all the curriculums and reading everything and thinking I had to do everything. And it didn't take long for me to realize that wasn't going to work. So I definitely had anything that I give as advice was self-learned.
Yeah.
The hard way.
Yeah. I find actually when I ask that question of the mums, it's very similar. Often it's just relax. You've said be calm. It's pretty much the same thing, isn't it? It's all going to be okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I would go back and do it again. I would go back and do it again in a heartbeat. And if the job had not fell in my lap, we would still be probably homeschooling. It's just the circumstances that changed, and sometimes you have to make changes for a family. And that's part of the things you have to understand, is sometimes things change and life changes, and that's okay. And, but had that not happened, we probably would have still, because they would have still been in the district they were in, and I would not have felt comfortable sending them to that. So they would still probably be homeschooled, albeit with mom not teaching algebra kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, get a tutor.
I definitely had a tutor, because me and math, no.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Amy, I am so grateful for your time and your wisdom, so generously given. And I know that it's going to be so, so helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.